Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. And as those of us who've worked in and around Washington, D.C. for a long time know, the nation's capital has been plagued by out-of-control violent crime for a long time now. Fortunately, President Trump has not only acknowledged this problem, but he's actually done something about it. And I have to give some credit to Mayor Bowser, who finally welcomed the federal enforcement or support for law enforcement here in Washington, D.C. But the president has, as he has along the border, helped make not only America safe again, but he's helped make D.C. safe again. And this is not just for the benefit of people who happen to work here or residents who live here. This is for the benefit of the thousands, maybe even millions of tourists and others who come to Washington, D.C. to see the nation's capital and to learn more about our nation's history and how our government works. So we can see here on the chart next to me what some of the impact has been comparing 2024 to 2025, and just the difference between here's 24 and here's 25, just for basically 3 weeks. Motor vehicle theft has dropped precipitously. Robbery, you can see, here was 24. Here's the 3 weeks after President Trump announced the National Guard would begin law enforcement efforts. Burglary, down from 77 to 40, and combined violent crime has dropped precipitously. And one particular problem that I know has concerned my wife, among other people, has been the epidemic of carjackings, primarily by juveniles who, under the practice here in D.C., are basically not prosecuted as adults, even though they may be 17, 18, 19, even 23 years old. And that's got to change, and it will change. But I'm grateful to President Trump, as well as the new U.S. Attorney, Jeanine Pirro, for their efforts to help make the District of Columbia safe again. It's long overdue. And I also applaud President Trump for his efforts to expand the federal support for local law enforcement beyond the nation's capital. And we look forward to seeing that, whether it's the actual enforcement efforts or whether it's the deterrence that comes from knowing that if you do commit the crime, you're going to do the time, which is an important part of law enforcement practice. So we've got a distinguished guest with us today, Angela Giratelli, who is going to tell us a little bit about her story. Angela?
Thank you, Senator. Guess I don't need my phone. Thank you, Senators, for holding this press conference about this issue. So my name is Anna Giratelli. I'm a news reporter, so I don't endorse policies or politicians, but I wanted to take this opportunity to speak to the issue of D.C. crime today. I'm here to talk about an important subject, and I'm grateful for this invitation. Like many of you press here today, I moved to D.C. To pursue a career in political journalism, and D.C. was not my home, but it quickly became my home. I was here in D.C. for 7 years. They were great years, and I planned to stay here for years to come. I'd been saving up for a condo, and that changed in 2020. I was a few blocks from here, actually at Union Station, outside where we are today at the Capitol, walking to the post office to mail a package on a Saturday morning. And a man attacked me in broad daylight on the sidewalk with other people around. This man lunged at me, he grabbed me, and he pinned my arms down. I was helpless, and I was powerless to fight back against him. He sexually assaulted me in public on the sidewalk. I screamed for help, and he screamed over my voice, drowning me out. I thank God, I truly thank God, people were there and people got involved and saved me that day. He got away that day, but DNA on my clothing led D.C. police to him. He was already in the system. He had a criminal record at D.C. And 3 months later, after the attack, police were able to find him on the street. They informed me that he was homeless and living about 2 blocks from my apartment building, and they arrested him. It was great news until the following day when I heard from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they said he had been released from jail at the judge's discretion. He had returned to living on the street, blocks from my apartment building, and I didn't feel safe, and so I moved away from D.C. and to the state of Texas, so to give a shout out where it's due. In the year and a half that it took for the case to move to trial, police arrested him not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, 5 times. And in every incident, the judge released him from jail the following day. Some of these arrests include exposing himself to a Supreme Court staff member just a block across the street and wielding a machete in public. The U.S. Attorney's Office prosecuted my case, and I was told because the jail was crowded, the judge chose to release him to make sure that public health standards could be maintained in the jail. He was finally held in jail when our case moved forward at the end of 2021. In 2022, he pleaded guilty to a sex abuse charge for what he did to me. He went to prison and has since been released. He served about 2.5 years for my charge. I found out at sentencing he had attacked an off-duty female police officer shortly before me. That was included. And then the 5 other arrests were also included into that prison sentence. So what happened to me and the D.C. government's role in it, I think is as much of a public scandal as much of a personal trauma. Even though he went to prison, the D.C. police stats show that no crime occurred. I had no idea D.C. police were and continue to cover up crime until I became a victim and looked for my own crime stats and found nothing. For sex abuse charges, only first-degree and some second-degree charges are on the crime map. Why don't I count? And how many more women and men and children have been uncounted? At a time when D.C. crime is being addressed, I ask, how can we understand the problem and the breadth of crime when D.C. police are covering up the stats? How can we fix something that we don't know how bad it really is? What happened to me was humiliating as a woman, and it was disgusting. Yet the way I was treated by the police sends a message that what happened to me didn't matter. I'm here today for the victims who D.C. police refuses to count. I think every victim deserves to be counted because there is not big victims and little victims. There are just victims. I'm here for the uncounted ones today. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Senators.
Thank you very much. Senator Marsha. Yeah.
Well, Anna, thank you for sharing your harrowing story. And unfortunately, your story is being repeated 8 times a day in our nation's capital. At least it was until about 2.5 weeks ago. Senator Cornyn, thank you for your leadership in doing this as well, and standing beside President Trump as we try to make Washington, D.C. safe again. Senator Cornyn and I share a couple things where I think we wake up in the morning as grandfathers, as parents, and we ask, is our family safe? And up here we have to ask, is our staff safe? Are the visitors from back home, are they safe? In fact, over 27 million visitors flock to our nation's capital annually, including over 2 million international guests and well over 1 million students, children, and young adults. And I asked myself this morning, walking in early, why do these masses come? Well, foreigners arrive to witness freedom firsthand, something they deeply long for, and it's here where they see the birthplace of modern democracy and the world's guardian of liberty and freedom. For Americans, we come often with our children or grandchildren to behold Lady Freedom atop the nation's capital here. She symbolizes freedom reigns supreme in our nation, that she stands over this nation as a guardian. She has a sheathed sword that points downward, and I love that. It declares that we are a people at peace, yet ready to defend our ideals. And today we're here to defend these ideas. For our youth, this is where history becomes life. Classroom lessons bloom into inspiration as they learn of our founding fathers and mothers' sacrifices, their blood, their sweat, their tears and fortunes to birth a nation conceived in liberty and justice for all. But people don't come to Washington, D.C. to encounter a murder every other day, to see a carjacking daily, or to see 8 violent crimes a day. Thanks to President Trump, our National Guard, brave law enforcement, and Mayor Muriel Bowser's pragmatic cooperation, crime is plummeting. In just over 2 weeks, murders, violent crimes, and carjackings have dropped by nearly 50% or more. But yet, none of us standing here are satisfied with those current crime rates. The pain lingers for each one of us about our own staffer's member. One of my staffer's cars in the apartment was riddled with bullets. 2 other my staffer's vehicles were broken in, and a staffer was attacked by young punks. No, we're not satisfied at all. Our shared dream and hopes is that Washington, D.C. remains the symbolic heart of our great nation, a vibrant embodiment of American democracy, strength, and exceptionalism. It must forever be our shining city on a hill, showcasing America's best and inspiring the next generation of patriots. Thank you.
Senator Tuberville.
Well, thank you, Senator Cornyn. Thank you for having this press conference. Much needed. Been here 5 years, never seen anything like this. I grew up in smaller towns, but it all goes back to one thing: leadership. Leadership of a mayor, leadership of a city council. They should be embarrassed. Ever since I've been up here, we've had mental illness, drugs, homeless all over the streets. I walk or jog every day, and I carry a well-known 9-iron with me, a golf club. And I've had to pull it out several times when almost accosted by people on the streets, in neighborhoods. It's just absolutely embarrassing. Washington, D.C. is the capital of the free world. And my God, it's the only place I've ever seen trees growing out of the sidewalk. I mean, there's no pride here. There's no pride from the people, the leadership that run this city until President Trump came in. Nobody cuts the grass. Outside my house, which is 100 yards from the Capitol, I've watched weeds grow and wondered how long is it going to take for them to grow, cut these weeds. They cut it 2.5 weeks ago for the first time in 5 years. It was almost 6 feet tall. The people around here evidently spend their money on something else. They obviously don't spend it on the beautification of the #1 city in this country in terms of freedom around the world and in this country. It's absolutely amazing to me. The murder rate here is worse than Bogota, Colombia. I want you to think about that. Washington, D.C., the face of our country. It's embarrassing. Absolutely embarrassing. Again, I've been here 5 years, and I've had to step over homeless, have had to ask police, to help in certain areas. Hey, there's something going on down here. I think we've woken up, and thank God for President Trump. We've had MS-13 gang members in the last few weeks that have been arrested. Now, I was in coaching for a long time, and I've been around and warned kids all my life of drugs. Up here, drugs are very easy to come by. Very easy to come by. I don't know whether politicians are making money off these drugs, but something needs to stop. Again, thank goodness for President Trump. The cavalry's coming, and President Trump, I was in a press conference with him yesterday, and he said he's going to Chicago. The people of this country deserve help. And here's the way I look at it. You can have the greatest family in the world. You can have a great education. You have money in the bank. You can love your kids. But if you don't have safe streets and neighborhoods, you have nothing. You have nothing. And the Democrats should be ashamed of themselves because you watch TV and they push it every day. You push it every day. Stand up for something. Liberals, please stand up for something. Stand up for the right and the rule of law. Thank you.
Senator Blackburn is not here. Senator Moody is here.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn, for gathering us together, and thank you for those that are here to address such an important issue. I am Ashley Moody. I am one of the newest U.S. senators. I am here with my new colleague, John Husted from Ohio. But just so that all of you know, I am number 99, and he is 100. That is very important. I would like for you to know that. One of the things that we both understood in coming up here, and the warnings from many across our states, was be careful when you get to our nation's capital. It is not a safe place. And to someone like me, who has had the oldest boy go off to overseas on deployment, or the wife of a law enforcement officer, or someone as a former federal prosecutor and judge and attorney general, I understand danger. And every warning that we received was spot on, because we got here and immediately started hearing staff that was afraid to go out at night from their apartments, members that had staff murdered, attacked, assaulted. And sadly, back home, we have families who wanted to visit the nation's capital and were afraid to do so. We had young people starting out their careers that wanted to work here, whose families were advising them not to because it was too dangerous. And as someone who hails from the great state of Florida, where so many were dispatched and invited to come be part of this administration and turn this nation around, it is sad to think that people have to consider their safety when deciding whether to serve their nation in the Capitol. I am so proud that we now have a president who showed up on day one and said, it will not be part of our discussion at all with using the phrases, this is how we've always done things, or this is how it's always been. Every single issue he has addressed, he has thought outside the box, using the laws and the tools and the resources available to him to make a difference on common sense initiatives to promote the strength and the safety of this nation. And I, for one, seeing the data that has resulted as a result of this crackdown of crime in D.C., no one can doubt that this was the right move, not only for the nation's capital, but for the rest of this country, for anyone who wants to come here and serve the American people, or any family or constituent American that wants to come here and be a part of this government, their government, and the future of this country. And as for what we should do around this nation, and using this as a model, it can be no surprise that the basic elements of ensuring strength and safety in a community come down to ensuring that you are not pulling resources or defunding your police, ensuring that you are not decriminalizing crime, ensuring that you are not promoting rogue prosecutors who refuse to follow and enforce the law, making sure you don't have a revolving jailhouse door, meaning no pretrial conditions such as cash bond or other pretrial conditions, making sure that you are holding juveniles accountable. Because you're under 18 doesn't mean you should be able to violently assault someone or murder someone and just walk out the door. And having a sense of morale and boost and support for your law enforcement community. And that doesn't just mean focusing on training and recruitment and making sure you can fulfill your ranks, but showing support for those who signed up to stand on the thin line between chaos and order and peace. I just would like to say thank you again to President Trump for ignoring the insults and the criticism from fascism to racism, and for telling every community, no matter your economic status, no matter your wealth, no matter where you may find yourself in this nation, that you matter. And he weathered the criticism and will continue to do so, because that is what we, as you have trusted and put in these roles, have promised to do. And that is ensure that we are promoting, within the scope of the power that's been given to us, the people of this nation, their safety, and the prosperity of their families. So thank you very much to this administration. We here in the Senate want to do everything we can and to support this ongoing effort to crack down on crime across this nation. I, for one, as one of the newest senators and with my background, am very excited to dig in, and I thank again Senator Cornyn for calling us all together to voice our support.
Senator Lee.
Thank you so much, Senator Cornyn, for putting this together, and thank you, Angela, for sharing your harrowing story. It's one that conjures horrific memories and experiences that no one should have to endure, and I'm so sorry you had to endure that, but thank you for sharing your story with America. National capitals are supposed to be a source of national pride. You think of Paris, Tokyo, you think of London. They all perform that. In many respects, our nation's capital does the same. This is a beautiful city with some amazing architecture, our beautiful domed buildings, our marble colonnades, not to mention the layout of the city, the landscaping. There's so many things about it that are beautiful. But when those same beautiful domed buildings and marble colonnades share streets with open-air crime scenes, something has gone terribly wrong. Now, let's take a trip back through history for a minute, just to reorient ourselves around first principles surrounding this city. We have to remember that the Constitution itself doesn't mandate its existence. It doesn't mandate the place for the seat of our national government. During the early years of the Republic, our national capital has been housed, albeit temporarily, in Philadelphia and New York. In theory, if we wanted to, we could put our national capital somewhere else. But we do have authority to designate a national capital, which we've done by statute. That authority comes under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution. But it's put in there with may language, not shall, that we may designate a city to serve as our nation's capital. And it says something important, that when we do exercise that authority, we are to be the sole lawmaking organ for that capital city, to exercise exclusive legislative jurisdiction. Now, over the last 52 years since the D.C. Home Rule Act of 1973 was enacted, we have outsourced that authority to D.C.'s local government. Regardless of the intentions that went into that, we can see that it hasn't worked out well. Whether you call it a failure to supervise the D.C. government by Congress, fair accusation, I suppose, or whether you call that just a failure to act appropriately by the D.C. government, or a combination of the two, and I think that's fair too. We've ended up in a situation in which I think few members of Congress, few members of the House or Senate, cannot say that they haven't experienced personally, through family members, through staff, probably all of the above, the effects of D.C. crime. The fact that it's been getting so much worse over the last few decades, we've seen this city sliding into deeper levels of chaos and lawlessness. Last year, this city recorded more homicides than at any point over the last 2 decades. And carjackings have doubled. You've got families, workers, local residents, and tourists from all over the country who have experienced this. And in many cases, people have become targets who work here, not just in the city, but in some cases on Capitol Hill itself. President Trump was able to see what every American could see if they had eyes to see it and an opportunity to witness it, which is that this is out of control. And I want to commend President Trump for doing what he did, because in just a few weeks' time, we've seen real results. Once he deployed the National Guard and federal law enforcement to help, in just 3 weeks, we've seen violent crime cut nearly in half, burglaries down 48%, car thefts down 36%. That's what real leadership does. It's what real leadership looks like. Now, back to the beginning of the story, where we went back in time and remembered what the Constitution does and does not require, and where our capital has existed in the past. Let's remember why that authority was given to Congress to begin with. Those who framed our Constitution and wrote it, drafted it, and ultimately ratified it, understood the reluctance on the part of the founding generation to place our nation's capital inside of another state. They didn't want any one state to have an outsized influence on how our national government would work. And they knew that was always a risk as long as it remained in in Pennsylvania or New York or any other state. That's why they created the authority under the so-called Enclave Clause, Clause 17 of Article 1, Section 8. They wanted any seat of government that we might establish to be immune from the vicissitudes of a local government, particularly if policy choices were preferred by that local government in a way that were inconsistent with the national will. That's why Congress is in charge of making D.C.'s laws. So look, if we can reform the home rule status, we can give that a try. But we have to remember this is authority that is ours. It's been delegated unwisely in my view. If we can reform that, then let's do it. And President Trump's action is an important first step in that direction. But to the extent that that experiment is not able to work out, then we've got to be ready to do what needs to be done and undo home rule. Ultimately, it is the 100 senators and the 435 representatives who were in charge of making law and policy, because this city is different. This is not just a local city, not just a city with a local constituency. This has a national constituency. And if crime is a problem here, we have to own it. It's ours to own. And I applaud President Trump for taking this important first step in that direction. And looks like, oh, you've got the ball.
Senator Hoeven, Senator Husted, and Senator Blackburn.
Look, it's common sense. This is just common sense. I mean, whether you live here, whether you come here to work, whether you come here to visit, you want to be safe. You don't come to get carjacked or assaulted or robbed. This is common sense. People need to be safe in our nation's capital. And that's what this is all about. And as Mike Lee explained very well, we have a responsibility. If we just continue to let this crime go on, then isn't Congress at fault when ultimately it is our responsibility? So it's very good that President Trump has stepped forward and said, hey, we need to have a safe nation's capital. And ultimately, Congress has this responsibility. If it's not getting done, who else are we supposed to blame? Say, oh, well, we handed off power and they're not doing their job, so what? That's ridiculous. Of course we have to make sure that our capital is safe. That's our job. And the other thing I'll say is the National Guard is trained to do this kind of work. These are military police units. Matter of fact, a lot of those Guard members, probably in their civilian work, are law enforcement. They're professionals. They're trained to do it. I was a governor for 10 years, and as a governor, I knew, and all the governors can tell you, that the National Guard is a Swiss Army knife. If you have flood, fire, tornado, you need any kind of emergency response or anything else, who do you call? You call the National Guard. They're trained to do this kind of work. And they're not the only ones helping out. They're doing an incredible job, and their visibility is very effective as well as a deterrent. But I was visiting with Secretary of Interior Doug Burgum, who's from my state of North Dakota, and I called him up. It was fairly late. He was out actually doing a ride with the park police, and they were out in some very dangerous, formerly dangerous parts of town with trained law enforcement professionals from the Park Service. So these are people who know what they're doing. And so I come back to where we started. It's common sense. People want to be safe. And it's long past time that we make sure that people are safe in our nation's capital.
Hello, I'm John Husted. I'm America's newest U.S. Senator, actually, right? I represent Ohio, and Senator Cornyn, thank you for hosting us here today. It is interesting to be new here and to see the city firsthand from the perspective of having be able to spend time in the nation's capital. I want to thank President Trump for having the courage and compassion to make this issue a priority. As we approach the nation's 250th anniversary, Washington, D.C. should be the safest city in the country, not the most dangerous. It should be a shining city on a hill that we can all be proud of as Americans, that when people from our states visit here, that they feel safe. When people from other countries visit here, that this city reflects the fact that we are the greatest nation in the free world. And up until a few weeks ago, it was clear we were not that place. I thank the President for leading, thank the Mayor of Washington, D.C. for finally coming around and supporting a lot of the work that the President has put in place. The National Guard, thank them for their service. If you see them out there on the streets, thank them for their service. But this shouldn't be a partisan issue. This is a fundamental element of what government should do, protect its citizens. That is one of the most important functions of government, that our police, that our courts protect citizens from crime, both violent crime, property crime. It's important. And I will tell you that I had some people they said, you know, when this happened, well, this is just the price of city life. No, it shouldn't have to be the price of city life. You shouldn't have to tolerate crime because you live in one of America's major cities. If we want those cities to be prosperous, they need to protect people and their property. And I got asked questions from citizens when the President deployed the Guard. It says, well, is Washington, D.C., really that dangerous? So I started to ask some of my staff that have lived here. Every single one of them has had an encounter with violent crime, from carjackings to stabbings in their apartment complex, to theft, to car break-ins. Every single one of them has experienced some form of crime as young people living in this city. And ultimately, if you don't protect people and their property, you'll have disinvestment, not just in Washington, D.C., but every city in this country. People will leave. And you know who's left? It's not the people that live in gated communities out in the suburbs. It's the people who are struggling the most. It's working people. It's people who live in poverty. They're the ones, oftentimes, that are the biggest victims of these violent crimes. And we need leadership. And in the cases where our mayors and our governors won't lead, because believe me, the mayors and the governors of every state in this country have the ability, every state and every city have the ability to solve this problem. And I hope that they will. The President shouldn't have to bring the National Guard into your city. You should care enough about the people that live there to do it on your own. But if you refuse to do it, the President has prioritized the safety of the citizens of this country, and particularly in Washington, D.C. And I thank him for his work, and we have an obligation as members of the Senate to protect this nation's capital. We did it by protecting the border, first of all, in the big, beautiful bill, and there's more to come from the President and from his team to make sure America is safe. And I thank him for that.
Senator Blackburn.
Well, thank you, Senator Cornyn, for organizing this today, and Anna, thank you for telling your story and for being here. We appreciate that. I had an interesting conversation with a mom who had a child that interned in D.C. And this took place over August, and she said, I worried every single day about her safety because of what she had heard about crime in D.C. And our citizens that come to this city to visit ought not to worry about the safety for their family, for them, for our staff members. And I am ever so grateful that President Trump has stepped forward boldly to clean up D.C., to make certain that criminals are apprehended, to make certain that criminals are treated like villains, and that we stop treating law enforcement like villains. But having that appreciation for law enforcement doing their job. One of the good things and one of the lessons that has come from this is the intentionality and the purposeful nature with which President Trump has carried out this operation here in D.C., bringing in the National Guard, providing that backup for law enforcement, making certain that the citizens and individuals that travel here and individuals that work here knew that the city was going to get cleaned up. And that purposeful nature is sending a message all across this country. When you talk to people that are living or working in areas where they have higher crime rates, you will hear them say, I'm hopeful President Trump looks at what is happening here. Because if your local leaders are going to fail and not accept that responsibility to keep their community safe, then it is going to be up to the president to bring that attention to that city. In all of this discussion about crime, I have not talked to one single person that wants a gang to move into their neighborhood. They don't want a gang to have a hub or a house in their neighborhood. They don't want drug dealers, human traffickers, sex traffickers, pedophiles, predators moving into their neighborhood. What they do want is a neighborhood that is going to be safe for their family, safe for their neighbors, and a neighborhood that is going to allow them to live and enjoy a wonderful quality of life.
Let me thank Anna again for being here today. And as you heard her say, she really has helped us shine the light on two problems. One is the lack of public safety and law enforcement in the nation's capital. But the second is that the toleration for cooking the books, basically to make crime in Washington, D.C. not look as serious as we all know it is from our personal experience, for the experience of people who we work with, and even our families. So I live in Austin, Texas. I have never had a conversation with my wife before about what to do if you're carjacked. But I have here in Washington, D.C. She travels with me back and forth from Austin on a weekly basis. And we've had this conversation. What am I supposed to do if somebody comes up to my car as I'm driving to the nation's capital and pulls a gun on me and tries to take the car? What should I do? That should concern everybody. Again, as Senator Marsha pointed out, millions of people come to visit the nation's capital. You've heard my colleagues talk about how this should be the safest city in the United States, but it's not right now. Thank you, President Trump, for helping to make this much better. And my hope is that this will serve as an example to mayors and all around the country to try to do what Mayor Bowser has done, which is to welcome the support of the National Guard to help make their constituents and help make their city safer. Happy to answer a few questions, or I've got colleagues here who can do it. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. I wanted to ask, what is the long-term solution for D.C.? Right now, it seems like these are mostly temporary measures. We know that the president only has until September 9th for his first 30 days. Does that authorization need to come from Congress? What does that need to look like?
Well, my hope would be that now that people see what the impact is of actually enforcing the law and making the city safer, that the city council and the mayor will embrace those practices and procedures. I know the U.S. Attorney, Judge Janine Pirro, is absolutely committed to doing that, and we are working with her and her team to change the law. For example, not to forgive 23, 22, 21-year-olds from prosecution under the law as adults. In most places around the country, you can be prosecuted in a given case as an adult, even as a juvenile, under the appropriate circumstances if the judge says so. But basically what happens now is juvenile offenders have impunity in the district. So we're looking at what legal changes may be necessary and what sort of changes in personnel, what those differences have made. But we will be, this is something that we'll continue to work on. Ultimately, the responsibility should be at the mayor and city council level. But if they're not going to do the job, particularly in the nation's capital, we will. Joseph?
President Trump has indicated that next up would be Chicago,
Yep.
and we're hearing potentially National Guard troops from Texas could be involved in that at some point. Do you support that kind of move with cities other than D.C., such as Chicago? And do you potentially see this working in a city like Dallas, where there is crime, and would this help keep Texas safe?
Well, I have all the confidence in the world in Governor Abbott and Mayor Johnson. You don't have this sort of experience in any Texas city, and I know the public would not tolerate it for a minute. If it's necessary, I support the National Guard assisting local law enforcement in cities like Chicago. Nowhere else in the United States would you tolerate 50 some odd shootings over the weekend, including, I believe, 8 fatalities. I mean, that's an emergency situation. That's a break the glass and figure out what do you need to do to solve the problem. In Chicago, it's tolerated. And I'm shocked that even here in the nation's capital, Mayor Bowser and City Council tolerated the level of crime which we've talked about, which has made virtually everybody who visits here, everybody who works here, everybody who leaves here feel unsafe. And so something's got to change, and I think President Trump has helped change the conversation. And we're committed, certainly I'm committed, I know my colleagues are committed to doing what we need to do to make our community safer, whether it's by assisting with National Guard support or otherwise to help solve this problem. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. How do you respond to Democratic governors who say that sending in federal enforcement without their consent infringes on state sovereignty?
Well, I think they're wrong. You know, it's a strange development here. Somehow President Trump has taken a stand for public safety and caused mayors and governors in some of these blue states to take a stand for the criminals and for a lack of public safety. I don't really understand that at all. You would think they would welcome the help that President Trump has offered rather than resist it and tolerate this, what has come to be the new normal in terms of the lack of public safety in some of our nation's major cities. So the National Guard has authorities both under federal authorities and state governor authorities. And Washington, D.C. is somewhat unique because it's a federal city. It's not a state, obviously. But I think they have just simply picked the wrong side, and they ought to work with us. I'm going to invite them to do so, particularly when it comes to changing the federal law to make sure that the nation's capital is safe. Yes, ma'am.
I just have one more follow-up on D.C. specifically. Some of the areas that we've seen a lot of National Guard placed on the wall, for example, were formerly policed by, or are still policed by National Park Service, and a number of National Park Service police were about 25% of their force was cut earlier this year. Do you think those people need to be rehired, or do you think that they need to open up a hiring process to kind of reinforce the people that were already doing some of those jobs?
I don't know enough about the park police, for example, to know what the appropriate staffing levels may be. My impression is that handcuffs have been put on the nation's capital police by the Metropolitan Police and others by local government. Now those handcuffs have been taken off. And so that is a conversation we should have, is what the division of responsibility is and what the appropriate staffing levels are in order to accomplish the goal.
Last question.
Yes, sir.
Can you just walk me through what you're looking into in terms of what might change here in D.C. in terms of trying to change up the crime issues, for example, or the jail issue, or the courts have said that they're overwhelmed right now. Have you looked into that at all?
Well, so far we've heard nothing but excuses, and we've been asked to accept the new normal. Well, Anna has been here to eloquently and courageously tell her story about what is not normal and what should never be tolerated. And whether it's the failure of laws to allow the authorities to law enforcement, whether it's the judges who provide slap on the wrists The person that assaulted her would never get a 2-year sentence in any state in this nation, especially with all the prior charges and convictions. That's an outrage. So we're going to look at all aspects of this to see what the problem is, because there's just been too many excuses, and the time for excuses is over.
Thank you guys so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Yeah, appreciate it. Anna, thank you. Appreciate it very much. And I hope we can be doing more on the cooking the books. To me, that's the most egregious, because they just are consciously